Masechet Avoda Zara, Daf Samech Gimel. We saw a baraita yesterday that taught that if a person gives a sheep to a zonah in payment for her services, the Torah already says that that sheep is prohibited to use for a korban. However, if he gives her the sheep before the sin or after they sin together, then the sheep is permitted. So it seems like it's talking about before, that, a day before, sometime before, separate occasion, and after, a simple reading would be that he goes to the zonah, sins with her, and then a day later, a few days later, then he brings the sheep, and so that sheep is permitted because it was not given at the same time. That's the simple reading, but we're going to see that the simple reading cannot be correct because it contradicts another baraita. The baraita taught that if a man sinned with a zonah and then he gave her an animal afterwards, that animal can be used for a korban. Urminhi afilu mikan ad shalosh shanim etnana asur. A second baraita teaches that if a man sins with a prostitute and then gives her an animal later on, even up to 3 years later, that animal is prohibited. So this seems to be exactly the opposite. How can we reconcile these two baraitot? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Amar Rav Chisda la kashya. Hadamar hitba'ali li betale ze. Hadamar la hitba'ali betale setam. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says in the name of Rav Chisda, there is no contradiction between these two baraitot. They're talking about two different cases. The second baraita that says it's prohibited, that's when, let's say, right before he sins with her, he says, have intercourse with me in exchange for this sheep. And he has a sheep over here in his own property that he's pointing to. This is this sheep, right? I don't know. She's in his house, and they point out the window. That sheep over there, that it will be in exchange. Then that's prohibited because even though he is physically giving her the sheep maybe 2 years later, 3 years later, but because he designated that sheep now at this point, right before they sin together, and so when he gets those services, when they sin together, it's an exchange. He's getting her services, and this is as an exchange, she acquires the lamb. So in that case, she acquires the lamb, in fact, immediately. She owns it, even though he might deliver it to her house 2 years later. But that's why it's prohibited, because in effect the exchange happens at the same time as the sin. Whereas if he tells her before they engage in sin, sin with me for a sheep. He just says a sheep. He doesn't say which one. So there's no way that she can acquire any sheep at all. He has 100 sheep in his backyard, or no sheep, or it doesn't matter how many, because there's no single sheep that's designated. So then there's no sheep, even at the time that they sin. Now he owes her something, okay, but there's no sheep that goes there yet. And then a day later or 2 years later, then he comes and delivers the sheep. She only acquires it that time later on. And therefore, since it's disconnected from the time period of the sin, that sheep is permitted. That is the case of the first baraita. Now we ask, wait a second. In the second baraita that you said, that's talking about when he said this lamb. Even if he said this lamb, so what? She did not pull it. In general, in order for a Jew to acquire something, it's not enough to pay for it. Even if you pay for something, you don't acquire it. You're not responsible for it until the Jew actually pulls it. And so here, even though she is providing for him services, and even if they designate a certain sheep, she doesn't get it, doesn't belong to her until she actually pulls it. And she didn't pull it at the same time while they're sinning. She's not doing that. Rather, they sin sometime later, then she goes and pulls it. So then that should be permitted because she doesn't actually acquire it at the same time as the act of intercourse. So the answer is bizona goya de la kanya b'mshicha. We're talking about a case where the zona is not Jewish, and the requirement for mishicha that you only get something when you pull it, that only applies to a Jew, and if you're transferring some item to a Jew. But for a non-Jew, then let's say you're buying something, just paying for it. If a non-Jew pays for something, the non-Jew acquires it at the time of payment, even without pulling it, and also with barter. So therefore, since beforehand he said, you sin with me with payment of that lamb, and then at the moment that they have intercourse together, she is giving him those services as a barter. In exchange, she automatically acquires that sheep even without pulling it, and it works because she is not Jewish. Or you could say that the zonah is in fact a Jewish zonah. And there's another way. It's true, one way to acquire it is to pull it, but another way that a Jew can acquire something is if it's in her courtyard. So if he delivers the sheep into her courtyard beforehand, and then he says, sin with me with the payment of this. So as soon as they sin, it's already in her courtyard. And so she acquires it through her courtyard. We ask about that. Wait a second. If it's in her courtyard from before, then why do you call this a case of that he sinned with her and only then he gave it to her? She has it from before, because once you put it in her courtyard, it's already hers. So therefore, this is a case of when you give her the animal before the act of the sin, not after. So she's going to get it immediately, not only later on at the point of intercourse. La sericha de shavye nihala apotiki. Damar la I maitina li chuzuzeh mikan ad yom peloni muta v'im la shakle be'et nanech. Oh, this case, if you do want to say that the zonah is Jewish and you want to use this courtyard, so you have to add another stipulation, that we're talking about a case where he gives her the sheep as a designated payment. This sheep will be designated collateral. And he tells her, if I bring you cash from now until a certain day, until Wednesday, then that will be the payment and I'd get my sheep back. But if not, if I don't bring any cash to you from now till Wednesday, then this lamb will be yours. Therefore, here's the order. He comes on Sunday and he puts the lamb in her courtyard. But he says, this lamb is not going to be yours yet. It's just you're holding it in the courtyard, and this will be designated. I'm giving you this lamb as payment for the services that you will render on Monday. And she says, okay. But he says, listen, this sheep, that it will be payment only if I don't pay you in cash until Wednesday. So if I pay you before that, I'm going to take it back. If not, then you keep it. So therefore, the courtyard does not acquire it for her because he didn't give it to her yet. It's dependent on the condition. Then they sin on Monday. And then Wednesday comes around and he doesn't pay her cash. Only on Wednesday does she actually acquire the sheep. In such a case, that's where we're talking about when it says zeh, when he says this sheep. Well, because he said this sheep, so it becomes prohibited, even though it's she actually only acquires it afterwards by Wednesday. On Wednesday, we are now verifying, but now we understand that retroactively, really, this was her payment all the way back from Sunday or from Monday when they sinned. So that's the case where that sheep would be prohibited. But the case where it would be permitted is when he says, listen, can you sin with me? I will pay you a sheep, but doesn't designate which one. So then they sin, and then a few days later he comes and shows up with a sheep, but it didn't have to be that sheep. So she didn't acquire it at all in any way, any sheep from the time of the sin, but rather only when he chooses it and brings it to her. In that case, that sheep is permitted to use for a sacrifice because it's sufficiently disconnected from the act of the sin. Mativ Rav Sheshat, Omer Adam lahamarav ulefa'alav lechu v'echlu b'dinar zeh, su shtu b'dinar zeh, ve'eno choshesh lo mishum shevit v'lo mishum maaser v'lo mishum yen nesech. V'im amar lehem su v'echlu v'ani porea, su shtu ani porea choshesh mishum shevit v'mishum maaser v'mishum yen nesech. Now this is a challenge that Rav Sheshat is going to have. This challenge is going back to the case that we saw yesterday of the house of Rabbi Yanai. They used to do a favor to the poor people. during the Shivi'it year, when there was lots of produce around that's free for everyone, and the poor people would have lots of produce that they would go and get from the field. But this was perishable, and at some point that all that would become prohibited, and they couldn't store it. They'd have to put it back out for everybody or destroy it, and so it was of limited use. So during Shivi'it year is actually very good for the poor people because they can go and take things. The problem is in the 8th year, what are they going to eat? So the members of the house of Rabbi Yanai would do them a favor, and they would borrow Shivi'it produce, which you can do. That's okay. You can borrow Shivi'it produce. Now, you can't do commerce with Shivi'it produce. That's true. And if you did do commerce, then whatever they would pay back would have the prohibition. Let's say they borrowed and they paid back during the Shivi'it year with cash. That cash would have the prohibitions of Shivi'it on them, because that's the law. If you exchange during the Shivi'it year, the exchange also has a prohibition of Shivi'it. But they didn't do that. They borrowed produce during the 7th year, and then they waited a year later till the 8th year, and they paid back the poor people with 8th year produce, which was not grown in the 7th year, grown during the 8th year, which is totally permitted. And then the poor people could eat that free and clear. And they asked Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, yes, that's totally good. Because here we don't consider this an exchange, like a barter that would happen during the 7th year, but rather they borrowed the 7th year produce. Now there's a debt. Okay, the debt is a monetary number, and now they're just simply paying back the debt later on, and the debt does not acquire the prohibition of the original Shivi'it produce. That was the leniency that we saw. Now, Rav Sheshat is going to ask a challenge from a baraita. In this baraita, it's a long case. We're going to see that a debt is considered, that the prohibition of Shivi'it does transfer even through a debt. What is the case? A person tells his workers, his donkey drivers, or his laborers. Okay, so a boss has some workers, and it's lunchtime, and he says, here's a coin, go and get food. Or, here's a coin, go and drink something. He's allowed to do that. And the boss does not have to worry that the workers are going to go and buy Shivi'it produce, or they're going to go and they're going to eat without taking maaser, or they're going to go drink yayin nesech. He doesn't have to do that because he gives them money. Here's money for lunch. I give you money for lunch, and now you go and get something not kosher. That's not my problem. I give you money for lunch. You went and get something not kosher. It's your responsibility. The owner doesn't have to worry about that. Okay, that's a simple case. Now here's a more complicated case. If he says, listen, you go eat something, get something to eat, and I will pay the restaurant back. Go and drink something, and I will go to the bar, the store, and I will pay back the owner of that grocery store where you bought that drink. In that case, there is a problem that the owner has to make sure that they don't go and buy Shivi'it produce or something that has maaser was not taken out, or if they go and buy yayin nesech to drink. So that's a problem because he's not just giving them money and then they go spend the money whatever they want. Here, he is more directly paying for that money. And this is kind of like a loan, right? They're going, unless they're going to a grocery store, and they're taking things from the grocery store. They take it, and they say, we'll charge it to the boss. So now the boss owes money to the grocery store. He owes money for Shivi'it produce. And you see that this is a problem. And he has to worry about that and make sure that they don't have Shivi'it or they don't have Yain Nesech. Alma ki para deme isur kapara. Hachaname ki para deme isura kapara. Therefore, we see that when the owner comes and pays for those items, for these forbidden items, this is forbidden money that he is paying with. And so too here, in the case of the if it's Shivi'it, then those Shivi'it coins will have the status of Shivi'it, will have the prohibition of Shivi'it on them. Can only be used in a restricted way, the same way the Shivi'it food originally has restrictions, so to the money will have those same restrictions. And since we see that in this baraita, when someone pays back a loan, and originally the workers took Shivi'it food, now the owner is paying back the grocer, so that payment is considered Shivi'it status. So too, in the case of Rabbi Yanai's family members, where they borrowed Shivi'it produce, when they pay back in the 8th year, it should be that whatever they pay back will also have the status of Shivi'it produce, and will have that prohibition on it. So this is a challenge to Rabbi Yochanan, who approved what the members of Rabbi Yanai were doing. תרגמה רב חיסדא בחנווני המקיפו דמשתעבד לה, דכיוון דאורחי לקופה, כנראה דינר גבה. Rav Chisda resolves the problem by explaining that this Braita is talking about a case where that boss has an open tab at this grocery store. This is not the first time that someone went and said, here, charge my boss for it, where the employees go there. But rather, this boss that told the employees to go and buy things at this restaurant, take things up from the restaurants, or take things from the grocery store, he always goes and takes things or authorizes other people to take things from the grocery store. And he has an open tab that is always borrowing from, and then he goes and he pays it back. Because the store owner gives him credit regularly, it's like the boss his property is liened to the store owner, right? Because this is always done, so the store owner acquires the coin of the boss already from now. Although he didn't pay it physically, that coin is somewhere in his wallet, somewhere in his house, his property. It's on his property. But because this is a regular thing, maybe the store owner even keeps a written record of it. So it's like a loan that's written, where you have a lien on that. So because it's a regular thing that's well known and documented, therefore, as soon as the employees take something they take their food and their drink from the grocery store, it's considered as if that coin that is back at home in the home of the boss is already acquired by the store owner. So therefore, it's as if he's paying right now. It's as if he's right there, and the employee goes and he takes some shivi'i, takes some yayin nesech, and the boss is there paying for it immediately. Well, in that case, if he's paying for some shivi'it immediately, then obviously that would be trading one thing for another, buying shivi'it produce, or doing commerce with it, and then certainly the money is prohibited. That's why it's prohibited. Although yes, it's true he's going to bring the coin later, but because it's an open tab, it's as if the coin is already given at the time. Okay, so according to this answer, Rav Chisda, you're telling me that if it's a grocer that does not generally give credit to this boss, then it would be permitted, because then that would be a loan, right? The workers went, they took some food, and now it's a loan. If it's a loan, then it's permitted, like in the Rabbi Yanai's case. So then it would be permitted. If so, why does the Baraita make a distinction between a case where he either gives the coin to them, or he says, go and eat with this coin, go and drink with this coin, versus a case where he says, go and eat and drink, and then I will pay the store owner later, and the first one is permitted, the second one is not permitted. You always want to make a distinction between two closer cases to see a fine line, exactly what is permitted and what is prohibited. So therefore, really you should say, don't talk about the case where he said this coin, because obviously that would be okay. He gives his workers a coin and they go and buy it. Obviously that's okay. Rather, the Braita should be more specific and say, it should say that if an employee says to his workers, go and get something from the store, then that would be a problem. And then say, when is that true that it's a problem? Only if it's a store, or the grocery store generally gives credit to this employer. Because then, since he generally gives credit, it's as if the employer is giving a coin immediately when the workers take something. It's as if he's there giving the coin, and so there he's giving the coin directly in exchange for shivi'it. So there, the prohibition of shivi'it applies to it, right? Because he's already has a shi'ibud owed to him. He has a lien. But if it's a grocer who does not regularly give credit to this guy, then it's permitted. And that would be a much finer distinction. But the Baraita does not make this fine distinction, and therefore this is a problematic answer. Another problem with this answer, ועוד, כן ואני שאין מקיפו מי לה משתעבד, ואמר רבא, עומד לחברו, תן מענה לפלוני, ויקחו כל נכסי לך, קנה מדין ערב. Furthermore, is it true that a store owner that does not regularly give credit doesn't get a lien on the person who is taking the things from his store? It's not true. It seems even if there is not a regular tab open, but even the first time that someone goes and takes something from a grocery store and they put it on a tab, already the grocery store owner will have a lien on the property of the person who owes it. How do you know that? Because Rava said, if someone tells his friend, listen, do me a favor, give 100 dinar to that person, and my property will be transferred to you, right? I want that person to have 100 dinar, whatever. For some reason, I'm paying him 100 dinar. I want him to have 100 dinar. So you give it to him instead, and you will acquire my property. The law is that works. Just by saying that, the property there's a lien on my property to you, because once you give them that money, then my property is already liened to you. Kana, there's a kinyan. And how does this kinyan work? You didn't go and do a kinyan, physical kinyan on my property. It works from the law of a guarantor. It will be the same as if someone lent you money. And so now I say, I'll be your guarantor. If you don't pay back, I will pay back. You know what happens? If you don't pay back, that guy, the lender, can come and take my property. How can he take my property? It's because I said I will pay. It's as if he gave the money to me. And now I owe him. So even though I only said I will guarantee your loan, I already owe him. So this is the same thing. Even though it's not a loan, it's a little bit different. I'm saying that you give him money and then you can collect it from me. Just by saying that, you already have a lien on my property, just like a guarantor creates a lien on his own property by saying I will guarantee your loan. And so too here, by the employer telling the store owner, listen, give them whatever they want and I will pay. So then that already creates a lien on my property, on my coin, that I will have to pay. So it really doesn't matter if there's a regular tab open all the time, or if this is the first time. Even one time will create that lien, and therefore should be prohibited, because as if you already have the coin. אלא אמר רבא, לה שינה מקיפו ולה שינה מקיפו אף אגב דמשעבד לה, כיוון דלה מייחד שיבודי למצער. Rather, Rava says that it makes no difference whether the storekeeper generally gives this boss credit or doesn't generally give this boss credit. Even one time is true. It will create a lien on some property of the boss. However, since they did not designate what it's going to be, he didn't designate you'll get this piece of land or you'll get this coin. Therefore, it does not become permitted. Nothing becomes prohibited. There is no prohibition, and that's why in the case of the Bianai, it was totally fine to do that, because they didn't say they came and said we're going to borrow the seventh year fruit. They didn't say and you have a lien on that particular thing or that particular coin or anything else. They didn't say anything like that, and therefore when they come to pay back, even though yes they're indebted, they have a lien, they have to give something back to pay it back, but they didn't say what it is. So when they come and they give eighth year produce, it's totally permitted. So now how do you explain this case of the store owner? Why is it true that when the store owner tells the workers, you go and take anything you want from the store, and then I will pay, that in that case, when he comes and pays, there is a problem of shivi'it, that coin that he pays with will be prohibited as shivi'it. But he's not designated. He didn't say, I'll pay you back with this coin. He didn't say, I'll pay you back with this item. Rav Papa says, this baraita is only true in a case where the employer brought a coin first. In fact, he prepaid. It wasn't an open tab. Thus, the boss came with a coin to the grocery store and said, here is $100 bill. I want you to open an account for me. And my workers are going to come tomorrow. And they're going to come and take some food and drink. And whatever they take, you'll deduct from this money. So you see here, he brought the money in the first place. So that's why it's prohibited. But only in this case, because now the money is there. He's directly paying for some Shavi'it food that the workers took. Certainly, that's an exchange, a payment for Shavi'it, and that's why the payment becomes prohibited. But you're right, if he didn't pay and he came later on and paid a loan, Shavi'it does not transfer to payment of a debt. Amar Rav Kana, Amrita Dishma'ata, Kamed Rav Zavid min Nehar De'ah. Rav Kana says, I said this law, and Rav Papa's explanation, in front of Rav Zavid in Nehar De'ah. Amar li yachi, adetani se'u v'echlu ushtu, v'ani poreya, se'u v'echlu, se'u ushtu, v'ani mechashem miba'e le. And however, Rav Zavid objected. It says, this explanation of Papa doesn't fit with the words of the Braita, because the Braita, instead of saying that the boss tells the workers, go and eat, go and drink, and I will pay it back to the store owner, he should have said, go and eat, go and drink, and I will calculate with the store owner how much to deduct, right? I gave him a $100 bill. You guys, you ate $30 worth. Okay, now I'm going to deduct it. There's $70 left. It's not, he's not paying, but rather figuring out how much to deduct. Mi ba'ele. Amar le taneh se'u v'ani mechashev. And the answer was, okay, change the words of the Baraita. Maybe we got some of the words wrong, and say v'ani mechashev instead of v'ani poreya. Rav Ashe Amar Kigon Shenatal Venatan Bayad. Rav Ashe says no. We can explain the Braita in another way, where the employer actually took the food and the drink from the storekeeper and gave it to the employee. In other words, the boss said, "Time for lunch. Workers, go to the store and tell me what you want." And then so the workers go and say, "Oh, we want that sandwich. We want that salad." And then the owner goes to the counter, takes the salad and gives it to the employees. So he's physically giving it to them. He's giving them, let's say, Shavi'it produce, right? So since he's physically giving it to them, and that's, and then he's going to pay for it. So therefore, that is clearly an exchange, not a loan, because it's not a loan. He's actually giving it to them with his hand. Amar le Rav Yemal Rav Ashe, Yachi adetane su v'chlu ushtu telu v'chlu telu ushtu miba'ele. But Rav Yemal said that doesn't fit with the words of the Braita, because instead of saying go out and eat, go out and drink, which sounds like the boss is not coming with them, it should have said take this and eat it, take this and drink it. And he answered, okay, change the words of the Braita and let it say, take this and eat, take this and drink, because he's giving it to them directly. So he is actually taking this produce himself. It's not a loan at all, right? He took it from the store owner, and so then he gave it to them. But since he took it from the store owner, he got these things himself, and then he pays for it. So certainly that payment would have the status of Shavi'it. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.